I'll never forget the sound of her body hitting that conference room floor. The notary's voice had barely finished reading the third paragraph of my will when Jennifer, my daughter-in-law, let out this strangled gasp, and down she went. Her designer handbag scattered across the polished mahogany table, lipstick rolling toward her husband's feet, while her perfectly manicured fingers clawed at the air. My son David jumped up so fast his chair toppled backward, and the lawyer just sat there with his reading glasses halfway down his nose, looking at me like I'd just performed a magic trick. But you know what? I just sat there, calm as Sunday morning, my hands folded in my lap, watching the chaos unfold. Because this moment, this beautiful, terrible moment, had been 3 years in the making. But to understand how we got here, how a 70-year-old woman from Cedar Falls, Iowa, ended up orchestrating the most satisfying 5 minutes of her entire life, I need to take you back. Back to another room, another moment, when different words were spoken that changed everything. My name is Loretta Brennan, and I'm 73 years old now, though this story really begins when I turned 70. And before you click away thinking this is just another bitter old woman complaining about her family, let me tell you, this is about so much more than that. This is about knowing your worth when everyone around you has decided you have none. This is about the moment you stop shrinking yourself to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold you anyway. So if you're settling in to hear this, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if that hype button pops up, click it. Help this story reach everyone who needs to hear that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. Now, let me tell you how this all started. I grew up in Cedar Falls back when it was even smaller than it is now. Back when you could still count all the stoplights on one hand, and everybody knew everybody's business, whether you wanted them to or not. My daddy worked at the John Deere plant, and Mama kept house and took in sewing when we needed extra. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. We were that in-between kind of family where you had enough to eat, but birthdays meant a homemade cake, not store-bought, and Christmas meant one good present and maybe some socks. I learned early on that you made do with what you had. Mama used to say, "Loretta Jean, the good Lord gave you 2 hands and a brain. Use all 3. She taught me to sew, to cook, to stretch a dollar till it screamed for mercy. By the time I was 12, I could take apart a chicken, make a week's worth of meals, and turn the scraps into soup. By 15, I was making my own clothes, better than anything in the Sears catalog. I met Robert Brennan at a church social when I was 19. He was 23. Fresh out of the Army, with dark hair he kept slicked back, and a smile that made my stomach flip. He worked maintenance at the university, not glamorous work, but steady, with benefits. We got married in 1971, small ceremony at St. Mary's, my mama's wedding dress taken in to fit me, a cake made by Robert's aunt, and a reception in the church basement with punch and finger sandwiches. We were happy, in that quiet, unremarkable way that doesn't make for interesting stories, but makes for a good life. Robert was steady as rain. He went to work, came home, fixed things around the house, watched whatever ball game was on TV. We had our son David in 1973, 8 pounds, 6 ounces, born at home because we didn't make it to the hospital in time. Robert nearly fainted when the midwife handed him the scissors to cut the cord. David was our whole world. We only had the one. I had complications after he was born, and the doctor said it wasn't safe to try again. So we poured everything we had into that boy, not spoiling him, mind you. We couldn't afford to, even if we'd wanted to, but making sure he had what he needed. Piano lessons when he showed interest in music, new shoes when his old ones wore out, not when the next kid down the line outgrew theirs, a college fund we started when he was 3 years old, $25 a month that sometimes felt like we were pulling out of our own skin, but we never missed a payment. Robert and I both worked hard our whole lives. After David started school, I took a job at the public library, shelving books and checking them out, helping folks find what they were looking for. It wasn't much money, but I loved it. All those stories, all those worlds, passing through my hands every day. I worked there for 32 years, until my knees started giving me trouble and standing for 8 hours became more than I could manage. Robert worked at the university for 41 years. 41 years of fixing leaky faucets and replacing ceiling tiles and making sure the boilers ran through Iowa winters that could freeze your face off. He never complained. That wasn't his way. He just did what needed doing, cashed his paycheck, and came home to me. We lived in the same little house we bought in 1972, 3-bedroom, 1-bath, basement that flooded every spring, but it was ours. We paid it off in 1997, threw a little party with David and a few friends, cracked open a bottle of champagne Robert's boss gave us. That might have been the happiest I ever saw him, making that last payment. "Nobody can take this from us now," he said, and I believed him. We saved what we could. Not a lot. Working-class wages in a small Iowa town don't leave much room for saving, but we were careful. We didn't take vacations, didn't eat out much, didn't buy things we didn't need. Robert drove the same truck for 18 years. I wore clothes until they couldn't be mended anymore. We clipped coupons, bought store brands, turned the thermostat down in winter, and relied on fans in summer. By the time Robert retired in 2008, we had about $80,000 saved, plus his pension and both our Social Security. We owned our house outright, had no debt, and figured we'd be just fine. Not rich, but comfortable. Enough to maybe take David and his future family on a little trip once in a while. Enough to help out if they needed it. Enough to not be a burden when we got old. Robert died in 2015. Heart attack, sudden as a summer storm. He was in the garage, doing something with his workbench, and when I called him for dinner, he didn't answer. I found him on the concrete floor, his eyes already vacant, one hand still holding a screwdriver. The paramedics said he was probably gone before he hit the ground, said he didn't suffer, said it like that was supposed to comfort me. Maybe it should have, but all I could think was that I didn't get to say goodbye. Didn't get to hold his hand. Didn't get to tell him one more time that he was the best man I ever knew. After Robert died, David and Jennifer, his wife, started coming around more often. At first, I thought it was because they cared, because they wanted to make sure I was okay. Jennifer would call me every few days, "Just checking in, Mom." She'd never called me Mom before. It was always Loretta or nothing at all. But suddenly it was Mom this and Mom that, and I was so lonely, so grateful for any scrap of attention that I didn't question it. They'd been married for 5 years by then. David met Jennifer at some work conference. He's an accountant at a firm in Waterloo, and brought her home 6 months later with a ring on her finger. She was from Chicago originally, which she made sure everyone knew within 5 minutes of meeting her. She had this way of talking about Cedar Falls like it was quaint, like we were all extras in some rural movie she was starring in. I tried to like her. Lord knows I tried. She was beautiful, I'll give her that, with this long blonde hair she wore in perfect waves and clothes that looked expensive, even though David couldn't have been making that much money. She wore heels everywhere, even to the grocery store, and her nails were always done, and she smelled like whatever perfume cost more than my monthly electric bill. But there was something cold about her, something that made me feel small. She'd look around our little house with this expression I couldn't quite read, not disgust exactly, but close, like she was studying a museum exhibit labeled "How Working People Used to Live." She never said anything directly rude, she was too smart for that. But there were little comments, little digs wrapped up in concern. "Is this the same couch you had when David was growing up? It must have such sentimental value. Do you really do all your shopping at Walmart? There's a Target in Waterloo, you know. I keep telling David we should help you redecorate. This wallpaper is so retro." I'd smile and nod and feel my face burn, but I wouldn't say anything. Because David loved her, and I didn't want to be the difficult mother-in-law, the one who caused problems. So I bit my tongue and told myself she meant well. She was just different from us. She'd grown up with more. It wasn't her fault she didn't understand. After Robert died, though, things shifted. Jennifer started talking about the house, about what you're going to do with the house. At first, I thought she meant, did I want to stay there or maybe move into one of those senior apartments by the hospital? But then, one Sunday dinner about 6 months after the funeral, she said, "You know, Mom, you really should think about selling this place. It's way too big for one person, and the market's decent right now. You could probably get 160, maybe 170,000 for it." Clear about that much, after fees and whatever repairs you'd need to make. I just stared at her, my fork halfway to my mouth. Sell the house? Well, yes. She dabbed her mouth with a napkin like we were at some fancy restaurant instead of my kitchen table. I mean, what are you going to do? Just live here by yourself until you die? That's not safe, Loretta. What if you fall? What if something happens? Plus, the upkeep on a place this old, the roof alone is probably going to need replacing soon, and I saw water stains in the basement. The house is fine, I said, maybe too sharply, because David looked up from his pot roast. Mom, Jennifer's just worried about you, he said, and I noticed how quick he was to defend her. We both are, and she's got a point. It's a lot of house for one person. It's my house, I said. Your father and I paid for it. We raised you in it. It's my home. Jennifer sighed like I was being deliberately difficult. Of course it's your home, Mom. Nobody's saying you have to sell right this minute. We're just thinking ahead, planning for your future. You want to make sure you have enough money to be comfortable, right? To cover your expenses, to have a cushion in case something happens. The way she said comfortable and cushion made it sound like I was one step from the poorhouse, like I didn't have Robert's pension and our Social Security and our savings, like I was some charity case they had to manage. But I didn't argue. I just changed the subject, and Jennifer let it drop, though I caught her and David exchanging a look that made my stomach knot up. That was the first real sign, though I didn't recognize it then. The first indication that Jennifer saw me not as a person, but as an asset, a thing to be managed and liquidated when the time was right. And as the months went by, the signs multiplied, little breadcrumbs of disrespect leading to that moment, that birthday, those words, that collapse in the lawyer's office. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. You need to understand how it built, how it accumulated like snow on a roof, until the weight of it became unbearable. After Robert passed, I tried to build a new life for myself. Not a replacement life. You can't replace 43 years with someone, but something that felt like living instead of just existing. I volunteered at the library twice a week, helping with the children's reading program. I joined a quilting group at church. I took walks around the neighborhood when my knees allowed it. I had coffee with friends, watched my shows, tended my little garden in the backyard. It wasn't exciting, but it was mine. I was okay. Not happy exactly, but okay, and that felt like enough. David and Jennifer would come for dinner every other Sunday, like clockwork. I'd cook, pot roast or fried chicken or ham, things David grew up eating, and Jennifer would pick at her food and talk about her new diet or whatever wellness trend she was following that month. Keto, then paleo, then intermittent fasting, then something with juice cleanses. I stopped trying to keep track. She'd also talk about money, always money. Their mortgage, apparently David had bought them a house in a nice neighborhood in Waterloo that stretched their budget. Her car payment, a Lexus because her old Honda wasn't safe. Their credit card debt, from necessary expenses like furniture and renovations. David's student loans, still paying them off even though he graduated 15 years ago. "It's just so expensive to live these days," she'd sigh, loading her fork with exactly 3 green beans. "I don't know how anyone makes it on a normal salary. We're barely scraping by, and David makes decent money. I can't imagine how people on, minimum wage survive." This from a woman with designer purses and a walk-in closet full of clothes with the tag still on them. I'd just nod and clear the plates and wonder when David had stopped noticing that his wife was gently, always gently, trying to shake me down. Because that's what it was, though I didn't want to admit it. She'd mention their financial struggles, then ask questions about my finances. How much was my pension worth? Did I have a retirement account? Had I thought about life insurance? What was I planning to do with all that money just sitting in the bank? "You should invest it," she told me once, leaning forward like she was sharing a secret. "Let it work for you. I know a financial advisor who could really help you maximize your returns. Or you could, help David pay down some of his debts. It would save him so much in interest over time, and he is your son." I smiled and said I'd think about it, and didn't mention that I'd already thought about it plenty. That Robert and I had been careful with our money for a reason, that I'd seen too many people lose their savings to sure-thing investments, or children who saw their parents as ATMs instead of human beings. The requests got more specific as time went on. Could I help with their mortgage payment this month? David's car needed repairs. Could I loan them the money? Jennifer saw a dining room set she loved, but they couldn't quite afford it. Maybe for David's birthday, I could chip in. I helped sometimes. I'm not heartless. When David's car genuinely did need new brakes, I wrote him a check for $800. When they had a plumbing emergency, I covered half the cost. But I noticed Jennifer was always there when these requests came up, always the one mentioning how much things cost, always the one suggesting I could help. And I noticed David never paid me back, even though he always said he would as soon as the next check came through. My friends started noticing too. Betty from church mentioned she'd seen Jennifer at the mall, shopping bags from expensive stores, and asked, wasn't David supposed to be struggling? Diane from the quilting group warned me to be careful, said her own daughter-in-law had bled her dry before she woke up and put her foot down. But I didn't want to believe it. He was my son, my only child, the boy I'd raised, the one I'd sacrificed for, the one who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and tell me I was the best mama in the world. Surely he wouldn't let his wife take advantage of me. Surely he saw what was happening. Except I think he did see, and he just didn't care enough to stop it. The shift happened gradually, then all at once, the way these things do. Jennifer stopped pretending to be nice. The mom became Loretta again, then sometimes nothing at all, like I wasn't worth addressing directly. She'd talk about me in the third person even when I was sitting right there. Does she really need to keep that big house? I don't understand why she won't listen to reason about her finances. She's so stubborn. I'm just trying to help, and she acts like I'm the bad guy. David would squeeze my hand and say, "You know, Jennifer, she just worries." Like that excused everything, like worry justified making me feel like a burden in my own home. They started showing up without calling first, letting themselves in with the spare key I'd given them for emergencies. I'd be in my nightgown, drinking my morning coffee, and suddenly there was Jennifer in my kitchen, looking through my mail, asking why I hadn't responded to some insurance form or bank statement. "We're just looking out for you," she'd say, but it felt like being surveilled. They brought up selling the house at least once a month. The roof was old, the furnace was inefficient, the neighborhood was declining. It wasn't. I couldn't possibly keep up with maintenance. I could and did. I'd be so much happier in a little apartment where I wouldn't have to worry about anything. I wouldn't. Think of all that equity just sitting there, Jennifer said once, and I swear her eyes had dollar signs in them. You could help David get ahead, give them the head start your generation never gave you. Wouldn't that feel good, knowing you'd secured your son's future? My generation, like we hadn't worked ourselves to the bone to give our children everything we could. Like that wasn't enough. Like we owed them more, always more. I started to dread their visits, started to feel anxious when the phone rang, wondering if it was Jennifer calling to check in, which really meant check on what I could squeeze out of you this week. Started to feel like I needed to defend every purchase I made, every dollar I spent on myself. Betty took me aside after church one Sunday and said, "Loretta, honey, you need to protect yourself. Change your locks. Don't give them access to your accounts. Make sure your will is airtight. I've seen this before, and it doesn't end well." David wouldn't, I started, but Betty cut me off. David's letting his wife steamroll you, which makes him just as guilty. Wake up before it's too late. But I couldn't, or wouldn't, because accepting that my son saw me as a piggy bank meant accepting that I'd failed somehow, that the child I'd raised had grown into someone I didn't recognize, and that hurt too much to face. So I kept making excuses, kept bending, kept shrinking myself to make room for their greed. Until my 70th birthday. The party wasn't my idea. Jennifer insisted on throwing me a birthday party, said it was important to celebrate milestones, said I deserved to be surrounded by people who loved me. I should have known something was wrong right then. Jennifer had never been interested in what I deserved before. But I was touched, I admitted. The idea that my daughter-in-law wanted to celebrate me, wanted to make me feel special, it softened something in my chest that had been hard for too long. So I said yes, and Jennifer took over, planning everything, telling me not to worry about a thing, just show up at her and David's house at 2 o'clock on Saturday. I bought a new dress for the occasion, nothing fancy, just a nice blue one from Kohl's that was on sale, and got my hair done at the beauty shop on Main Street. Martha, who'd been cutting my hair for 20 years, said I looked lovely, said the style made me look 10 years younger. I felt good driving over to David's house, felt like maybe things were turning around, like maybe this was a new chapter where Jennifer and I could finally find some common ground. The house was decorated when I arrived, balloons, streamers, a banner that said Happy 70th Birthday, Loretta, in silver letters. It looked festive, cheerful, like someone had put real thought into it. There were maybe 20 people there, some of David's friends, a few of my church ladies, my neighbor Harold and his wife Sue, Betty and Diane from my quilting group. Jennifer air-kissed my cheek, leaving a smear of lipstick I had to wipe off, and guided me into the living room where everyone shouted "Surprise!" even though I'd known about the party all week. David hugged me, wished me happy birthday, told me I looked beautiful. I wanted to believe the warmth in his eyes was genuine, not just for show. The party itself was fine. We ate finger foods and cake, store-bought, not homemade, which stung a little, but I didn't mention it. People gave me cards, small gifts, the kind of things you give elderly relatives when you don't know what they actually want. Lotion sets, devotional books, a decorative candle I'd never burn because it was too pretty. I smiled and thanked everyone and tried not to think about how this felt less like my birthday and more like a performance of my birthday. Then Jennifer tapped her wine glass with a fork, calling for attention. Everyone quieted down, turning to look at her, and she stood there in the center of the room like she was about to give a speech at a corporate event. "I just want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate Loretta's special day," she began, her voice syrupy sweet. 70 years is such an important milestone, and we wanted to make sure she felt loved and appreciated. People smiled and nodded. I smiled too, uncomfortable with being the center of attention, but trying to be gracious. As most of you know, Loretta's been alone since Robert passed, and David and I have been doing our best to look after her, to make sure she's taken care of. She paused, putting her hand on David's shoulder. He smiled up at her like she'd just said something profound instead of vaguely insulting. It's not always easy, of course. She's very independent. She said this like it was a character flaw, and she doesn't always want help, even when she needs it. My smile started to feel brittle. Where was this going? But today isn't about challenges, it's about celebration. So we wanted to do something special for Loretta, something to show her how much we care. Jennifer moved to the coffee table where a large envelope sat propped against a flower arrangement I only now noticed. She picked it up, holding it like it was some grand prize. David and I have been saving up, and we wanted to give Mom something that would really make a difference in her life. She handed me the envelope. Everyone was watching, phones out, recording this touching moment. I opened it, my fingers clumsy with the attention and the unease creeping up my spine. Inside was a brochure for Sunset Meadows Senior Living Community. I stared at it, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. It wasn't a gift certificate for a spa day or a weekend trip. It was a pamphlet for an assisted living facility. "We've already toured it," Jennifer continued, her voice bright and loud in the suddenly silent room. "It's wonderful. They have activities, 3 meals a day, medical staff on site 24/7. You'd have a little apartment, nothing to maintain, no more worrying about that big old house. We even put down a deposit to hold a spot for you. They have an opening in December. Perfect timing." The room was so quiet, I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen. Someone coughed. Betty looked horrified. I started, but Jennifer kept going. "I know change is scary, but this is really the best thing for everyone. You'd be so much safer there, so much more comfortable. And David and I could finally stop worrying about you rattling around in that house all alone. Plus," and here her voice dropped to something meant to sound conspiratorial, but it carried to every corner of the room, "we've already contacted a realtor about listing your house. The market's hot right now, and Kathy Harrison thinks we could get close to $180,000 for it. Imagine!" That's so much money just sitting there, doing nothing, when it could be working for you, securing your future. Securing my future? She meant securing their mortgage, their car payments, their lifestyle that they couldn't actually afford. "I'm not selling my house," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Jennifer's smile didn't waver. "Oh, Mom, I know it's hard to think about, but we've really thought this through, David and I. We've run the numbers." Of course she'd run the numbers. "And it just makes the most financial sense. You can't keep living in the past. Robert's gone, and you need to start thinking practically about your future." Robert's gone. She said it like I'd forgotten, like I hadn't spent every single day of the last 3 years aware of the empty space beside me in bed, the silence where his voice should be, the way the house echoed now in a way it never did when he was alive. "I don't want to live in a facility," I said, louder this time. "I want to stay in my home." "But that's the thing, Loretta." And there it was, not even Mom anymore. Just my name said with exasperation like I was a stubborn child. "It's not practical. You're not getting any younger. What happens when you can't handle the stairs? What happens when you fall and there's no one there to help you? We're trying to prevent a tragedy here." David finally spoke up. "Mom, we're just worried about you." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. When had that happened? When had my boy, who used to crawl into bed with me during thunderstorms, become this man who stood by while his wife ambushed me at my own birthday party? If you were worried about me, you'd ask what I wanted instead of making plans behind my back, I said. The room was so tense you could have snapped it like a thread. My church ladies looked uncomfortable. David's friends were studying their phones. Harold looked angry on my behalf. Jennifer's smile turned sharp. We did what we had to do because you won't listen to reason. Someone has to look out for your best interests since you clearly won't. My best interests, I repeated, and I heard my voice shaking. Or your best interests? Because it seems to me like you're awfully interested in that money from selling my house. Her face flushed red. How dare you? I think it's time for me to go, I said, standing up. My legs felt weak, but I managed to stay upright. Thank you all for coming. I'm sorry you had to witness this. Betty was already on her feet, grabbing her purse. I'll drive you home, honey. Mom, don't leave like this, David said, but he didn't move to stop me, didn't defend me, didn't tell his wife she'd crossed the line. I walked toward the door. I had to pass Jennifer to get there, and she stepped slightly into my path, forcing me to stop. She looked me right in the eye, and her voice was low enough that maybe only I could hear it. Though in that silent room, I wouldn't bet on it. You know what your problem is, Loretta? You don't know your place anymore. You think you're entitled to all that money, that house, that life, but you're not. You're old. You're a burden. And frankly, you're not even worth $10 to me, let alone $180,000. The words hit me like a slap. Not even worth $10. I stood there frozen while everyone pretended they hadn't heard what they'd absolutely heard. And then I did the only thing I could do. I walked out, climbed into Betty's car, and let her drive me home while I stared out the window and tried not to cry. Betty didn't say anything until we pulled into my driveway. Then she turned to me and said, "Loretta, change your locks tonight. Call a lawyer tomorrow. Protect yourself, because those two sure as hell won't." I nodded, went inside, and sat on my couch. My couch in my house. The one I'd paid for with Robert's sweat and my own, and let myself cry for the first time since his funeral. And then I got angry. The anger came slowly at first, then all at once, like a fever breaking. I sat there on my couch, surrounded by the house I'd built a life in, and thought about Jennifer's words. Not even worth $10. Like I was a piece of furniture at a garage sale, something to be priced and disposed of when convenient. I thought about every time I'd bent, every time I'd smiled through an insult, every check I'd written and never been repaid. I thought about David, watching his wife dismantle his mother piece by piece and doing nothing. I thought about Robert, who'd worked 41 years so we'd have something, so I'd be taken care of, and how they wanted to take that security and use it to fund a lifestyle they couldn't afford. And I thought, no more. I got up, went to my bedroom, and pulled out the lockbox from the back of my closet where I kept important papers, birth certificates, Robert's death certificate, the deed to the house, bank statements, my will, the will Robert and I had made together 20 years ago, leaving everything to David because of course we would. He was our son, our only child. I looked at that will for a long time, looked at my signature and Robert's, witnessed by our lawyer Tom Hendricks, who'd been dead himself for 5 years now. This will left David everything. The house, the savings, Robert's life insurance payout that I'd never touched, the small investment account we'd built up, my mother's wedding ring that was worth maybe $2,000 but was priceless to me. Everything we'd worked for, everything we'd saved, it would all go to him, which meant it would all go to her. Jennifer would sell my house before my body was cold. She'd liquidate everything, spend it on whatever expensive things she thought she deserved. And in 5 years, there'd be nothing left of the life Robert and I built, except maybe some photos in a box in their basement, if I was lucky. I called Betty. "What's the name of that lawyer you used when your daughter-in-law tried to pull that stunt?" I asked. "Eleanor Pritchard," Betty said immediately, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "You ready to fight back?" "I'm ready to protect myself," I said. "That's different." "No, honey, it's the same thing." Eleanor Pritchard had an office above the bank downtown, up a flight of stairs that made my knees scream, but I climbed them anyway. She was maybe 50, with gray hair she didn't bother dyeing, and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Betty had told her the basics when setting up the appointment, so she already knew why I was there. "Tell me everything," she said, and I did. The whole sordid story, from Robert's death to my birthday party, the financial manipulation, the demands to sell my house. The assisted living ambush, Jennifer's parting words. Eleanor took notes on a legal pad, her face giving nothing away. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me. "What do you want to happen here, Mrs. Brennan?" "I want to make sure that when I die, my house and my money don't go to funding my daughter-in-law's shopping addiction," I said. "But I hesitated, feeling guilty even saying it. I don't want to completely disinherit David. He's still my son." "Even though he stood by while his wife abused you?" "He's still my son," I repeated, but I heard how hollow it sounded. Eleanor nodded. "Okay, let's talk about options." We spent 2 hours in that office. Eleanor explained trusts and conditions, charitable donations, and specific bequests. She told me horror stories about other families she'd worked with, cases where children had drained their parents' accounts while they were still alive, used power of attorney to steal from them, forged signatures, and committed outright fraud. "Your situation isn't the worst I've seen," she said, "but it's bad enough, and it'll get worse. Your daughter-in-law has already shown you who she is. Believe her." "What would you do," I asked, "if she were your daughter-in-law?" Eleanor smiled, and it was sharp. I'd make sure she knew exactly how little I thought she was worth. That's when the plan started to form. Not revenge exactly. I'm not a cruel person, never have been, but justice, a lesson, a way to make sure Jennifer understood that I wasn't a helpless old woman to be manipulated and discarded. We spent the next several weeks crafting my new will. It was complicated, full of legal language I didn't always understand, but Eleanor walked me through every clause, every condition. We built in protections, requirements, contingencies. We made it airtight, uncontestable, with witnesses and notaries and everything necessary to ensure it would hold up. I didn't tell David I was doing this. I didn't tell anyone except Betty and Eleanor and the notary we used. I wanted it to be a surprise, though I didn't take any pleasure in the thought. Mostly, I just felt tired and sad and determined. David called me twice in the weeks after my birthday. The first time, he said Jennifer felt I'd overreacted, that she'd only been trying to help, that I should apologize for making a scene at my own party. I hung up on him. The second time, he said maybe we should all sit down and talk like adults, sort this out, move past it. I told him I had nothing to say to either of them, and hung up again. Jennifer sent me a text. "You're being childish. We're trying to help you, and you're throwing it back in our faces. When you're ready to be reasonable, let us know." I blocked her number. I changed my locks like Betty said, had Harold's nephew, who's a locksmith, come out and replace all of them, including the one on the back door. I didn't tell David. If he wanted in my house, he could knock like any other guest. About 6 weeks after my birthday, David showed up unannounced. He tried his key, found it didn't work, and knocked. I looked through the peephole, saw him standing there looking frustrated, and had to fight the urge to open the door. This was my son, my baby. The boy I'd rocked to sleep and nursed through chickenpox and taught to ride a bike. But he'd chosen his wife over his mother. He'd watched her tear me down and said nothing, done nothing, been nothing but complicit. I didn't open the door. He knocked for 5 minutes, called my phone, I didn't answer, shouted through the door that he knew I was home, that this was ridiculous, that we were family. Finally, he left, his car tires screeching as he pulled away too fast down my quiet street. I sat on my couch and cried again, but this time the tears felt different. Not helpless, but grieving, mourning the relationship I'd thought we had, the son I'd thought I'd raised, the family I'd thought we were. Betty came over that night with wine and Chinese takeout. We sat at my kitchen table and she said, "You know this might not get better, right? He might not come around." "I know," I said. "You prepared for that?" I thought about the will sitting in Eleanor's safe. I thought about all the clauses and conditions Eleanor and I had crafted. I thought about Jennifer's face when she found out what I'd done. "Yes," I said, "I'm prepared." 3 months went by. David didn't call. Jennifer didn't text. It was like I'd ceased to exist for them. And you know what? It was almost a relief. No more surprise visits, no more financial interrogations, no more feeling like I had to defend my right to live in my own home and spend my own money. I went to my quilting group, volunteered at the library, had coffee with my friends. I watched my shows and tended my garden and lived my quiet little life. Some days I forgot to be angry. Some days I forgot to be sad. Some days I just existed, and that was okay too. Then in February, I caught pneumonia. It was bad, the kind that lands you in the hospital, hooked up to IVs and oxygen, chest x-rays showing lungs that looked like snowstorms. The doctor said I'd waited too long to come in, that I'd let it get too serious, that at my age I needed to be more careful. I spent 5 days in the hospital, Betty and Diane and Harold taking turns visiting me because David didn't come, didn't call, didn't acknowledge that his mother was in the hospital at all. When I was released, weak and shaky and 20 pounds lighter, the doctor said I needed someone to stay with me for a week or two, help out while I recovered. Betty volunteered immediately, packed a bag and moved into my guest room, brought me soup and made sure I took my medications, and scolded me when I tried to do too much too soon. It was during those 2 weeks, being cared for by someone who wasn't family but who loved me anyway, that I understood something important. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up. And blood doesn't mean much if it won't even show up when you're in the hospital. When I was recovered enough to be alone again, I called Eleanor Pritchard. "I want to make one more change to my will," I said. We met at her office again, me still a little breathless from the stairs but determined. I told her what I wanted to add, and she raised her eyebrows. "You sure about this?" she asked. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said. She drafted the amendment, we added it to the will, had it notarized and witnessed, and that was that. Everything was set. All I had to do now was live my life and wait. I want to be clear about something. I didn't want to die. I wasn't giving up or welcoming death or anything dramatic like that. I wanted years more, decades if I could get them. I wanted to see what happened next in the world, watch the seasons change, preserve the original quilts I was working on. I wanted to live. But I'm also 73 years old, and I'm realistic. Death comes for all of us eventually, and when it came for me, I wanted to know I'd protected what Robert and I built. I wanted to know that our life's work wouldn't be squandered. And yes, I wanted Jennifer to know exactly what I thought she was worth. So I lived my life, kept volunteering, kept quilting, kept having coffee with my friends. I thought about David sometimes, missed him sometimes, but mostly I felt at peace. I'd done what I could to protect myself and honor Robert's memory. The rest was out of my hands. And then, last month, I woke up with chest pains. I knew what it was immediately. When you've already lost one spouse to a heart attack, you know the signs. I called 911, kept the dispatcher on the phone while I waited, managed to unlock my front door so the paramedics could get in. Harold saw the ambulance, came running over. He rode with me to the hospital, held my hand while I tried not to panic, told me I'd be fine, even though neither of us knew if that was true. It was a heart attack, but not severe. I was lucky, the doctor said, that I'd called when I did, that I'd gotten help so quickly. They kept me for observation, talked about stents and medication and lifestyle changes, said I'd probably recover just fine, but I needed to be careful, take it easy, follow up with a cardiologist. And this time, David came. He showed up at the hospital the second day, looking haggard and scared. He sat beside my bed and took my hand and said, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have been there. I should have called." "Yes," I said, "you should have." "Jennifer and I are having problems," he said, like that excused 3 years of neglect. She's not who I thought she was. I think we're going to separate." I looked at my son and felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity. Just a kind of distant sadness for the relationship we used to have and would never have again. "I'm glad you came," I said, because I was raised to be gracious. "But David, I need you to understand something. What happened, what you let happen, it doesn't just go away because you're having marital problems. You chose her over me, over and over again. You watched her tear me down and you said nothing. You knew she was wrong at my birthday, and you still asked me to apologize to her." "I know," he whispered. "I know, and I'm sorry." "I appreciate that," I said. "But sorry doesn't fix it. Sorry doesn't undo 3 years. Sorry doesn't bring back the relationship we had." He started crying, and part of me wanted to comfort him like I did when he was small. But I'm not responsible for soothing the hurt feelings of a grown man who chose his own path. I recovered from the heart attack. They sent me home with a pharmacy's worth of medications and instructions to take it easy. Betty and Diane and Harold took turns checking on me, bringing me meals, making sure I wasn't overdoing it. David came by once a week. We'd have tea, talk about nothing much, dance around the giant elephant in the room. He never brought Jennifer, which was good because I'd made it clear she wasn't welcome. He told me they were separated, that she was living with her mother in Chicago, that the divorce would be final in 6 months. I didn't tell him about the will. Then, 2 weeks ago, David called me sounding panicked. Jennifer had been in a car accident, not serious, but serious enough that he'd been contacted as her emergency contact since the divorce wasn't final yet. She was fine, he assured me, just shaken up. But dealing with it had made him think about mortality, about what would happen if something happened to one of us. "Mom, do you have an updated will?" he asked. "I've been thinking we should probably go over your estate planning, make sure everything's in order." Just in case. There it was. Even separated from Jennifer, he was still thinking about my money, my house, my estate. Some habits die hard. "Everything's taken care of," I told him. "I updated my will last year. It's all in order." "Oh, good." He paused. "Can I ask? I assume you're leaving everything to me?" The audacity, the sheer, breathtaking audacity. "David," I said carefully, "my will is my business. When I die, you'll find out what's in it. Until then, it's not up for discussion." He didn't like that answer, but he couldn't really argue with it. We hung up shortly after, and I sat there thinking about how some people never learn. The next week, I got a letter from Jennifer. It was typed, probably to avoid any emotion in the handwriting, and it was astonishing. She apologized, sort of, for any misunderstandings between us. She said she hoped we could move past our differences and build a better relationship. She mentioned that she and David were working through things, news to him, I'd bet, and that family is so important. And then, at the end, the real point of the letter. I hope you know that David and I only ever wanted what was best for you, and we'd love to sit down and discuss your future plans, including your estate, so we can all be on the same page. My estate. She was separated from my son, supposedly living with her mother, but she was still after my money. I didn't respond to the letter. I threw it away, and then I called Eleanor Pritchard. "Is my will absolutely airtight?" I asked. "Fort Knox couldn't be more secure," she assured me. "Why?" "Just wanted to make sure," I said, "in case something happens." "Loretta, are you sick? Is there something you're not telling me?" "I'm fine," I said, "just being prepared." And I was fine, but I'm also 73 years old with a heart condition, and realistic beats optimistic any day of the week. So I made sure all my affairs were in order. I wrote letters to Betty, to Diane, to Harold, telling them how much their friendship meant to me. I organized my photos, labeled them with names and dates so whoever went through them would know who everyone was. I cleaned out my closets, donated clothes I didn't wear, threw away things nobody would want. I didn't do it morbidly. I did it practically, the same way I'd lived my whole life. And then I just kept living, day by day, until yesterday. Yesterday, I woke up feeling strange. Not bad exactly, but not right either. My chest felt heavy, my left arm tingled, and I knew, the same way I knew before, that something was wrong. I called 911, I called Betty, I texted Harold because he checks his phone more than he answers calls. And then, because I'm thorough, and because I knew this might be it, I called Eleanor Pritchard. "Eleanor," I said, my breath coming short, "I think this is a bad one. Make sure my will gets executed exactly as written." "Make sure?" "Loretta, save your breath. I'll handle everything, I promise." The paramedics arrived. This heart attack was worse than the last. I knew it, they knew it, everyone knew it. They worked on me in the ambulance, in the emergency room, and I drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of machines beeping and people shouting medical terms and a profound exhaustion that went bone deep. I woke up in ICU. Betty was there, holding my hand. David was there too, crying. I'd survived, but it had been close, closer than last time, too close. The doctor said I needed to get my affairs in order, which is medical speak for prepare to die. They didn't say it that directly, but I understood. My heart was damaged, weakened beyond repair. I had months, maybe a year if I was lucky. David stayed by my bed for hours, apologizing, crying, telling me he loved me. I told him I loved him too, because I did. Loving someone and trusting them are two different things. "Mom," he said at one point, "about your will." "David," I interrupted, my voice weak but firm, "don't." He didn't bring it up again. I spent a week in the hospital. When they released me, it was with hospice paperwork and a morphine prescription and instructions on what to do when the end came. I came home to my house, the one I'd fought to keep, and looked around at my life. Photos on the walls, Robert's reading chair that I'd never been able to give away, my quilts stacked in the closet, my books on the shelves. This was what I'd fought for. This was what I'd protected. And when I died, whether in a month or 6 months or a year, Jennifer would finally find out exactly what I thought she was worth. I spent the next few weeks in a strange kind of peace. Knowing you're dying is terrifying, yes, but it's also clarifying. All the small worries that used to keep me up at night. Did I remember to pay the electric bill? Should I repaint the bathroom? What will people think? None of it mattered anymore. I was going to die, and before I did, I had things to arrange. Eleanor came to my house 3 days after I got home from the hospital. She brought her briefcase and her legal pad and that sharp, assessing look that said she meant business. "Talk me through it one more time," she said, settling into Robert's old chair. "I want to make sure we haven't missed anything." So I walked her through my will, clause by clause, the way we'd written it over the past year. Eleanor took notes, asked questions, made sure every contingency was covered. The house would go to Betty, not David, not Jennifer, Betty, who'd been more of a daughter to me than my daughter-in-law ever was, who'd shown up when I was sick, who'd loved me without expecting anything in return. The deed would transfer to her immediately upon my death, no strings attached, no way for David to contest it. My savings, about $93,000 after medical expenses, would be split 3 ways: a third to Betty, a third to the public library for their children's literacy program, and a third to the local women's shelter. Not a penny to David or Jennifer. Robert's life insurance money, which I'd never touched, about $50,000, would go to Harold's nephew Marcus, who was in his 20s and saving for college. Robert had always liked that boy, and I knew he'd use it well. My mother's wedding ring and my few pieces of good jewelry would go to Diane's granddaughter, who'd visited me in the hospital and held my hand and told me stories about her high school drama club. My car would go to Sue, Harold's wife, whose car had died last year and who couldn't afford to replace it. Everything else, my furniture, my clothes, my kitchen items, my books, could be divided among my friends or donated to charity. Whatever they didn't want, they could sell. And the money would go to the animal shelter. And David? David would receive exactly $10, a single $10 bill specifically noted in the will with a clause explaining why. To my son David Brennan, I leave the sum of $10 as that is approximately what his wife Jennifer deemed me to be worth at my 70th birthday party. I hope this inheritance serves as a reminder that actions have consequences and that standing by while someone you love is mistreated makes you equally culpable. Eleanor had tried to talk me out of that clause. "It's vindictive," she said. "It makes your motivations clear. He could argue you weren't in your right mind, that you were acting out of spite." "Let him argue," I said. "I have medical records showing I was of sound mind when I wrote this will. I have witnesses. I have you, and you'll testify that I knew exactly what I was doing. And Eleanor? I was of sound mind. I am of sound mind. This isn't spite. This is justice." She'd nodded slowly, then added the clause. But the real genius, the part that still made me smile when I thought about it, was the way we'd structure the will reading. Normally, wills are read privately, just the lawyer and the beneficiaries. But I'd specified in my will that it must be read aloud in a formal setting with all beneficiaries present: Betty, Diane, Harold, and Sue, the library director, the director of the women's shelter, Marcus, Diane's granddaughter, and, of course, David. I'd also specified that David was permitted to bring his wife if they were still married, or his soon-to-be ex-wife if they were in the process of divorcing, because she spent 3 years expressing interest in my estate, and I believe she deserves to be present when it's distributed. Jennifer would be there. She'd come. I knew she would, because she'd want to see what she was getting. She probably assumed David would inherit everything, and as his wife, or almost ex-wife, she'd have access to it. She'd probably already spent it in her mind, already picked out what she'd buy first, already calculated how much she'd get in the divorce settlement, and she'd be there when she found out she was getting nothing. Eleanor finished her notes and looked at me. "You know this is going to hurt David. Whatever his faults, he's still your son, and this will devastate him." "Yes," I said, "it will. But Eleanor, he devastated me first. He chose his wife over his mother over and over again. He watched her abuse me and said nothing. He asked me to sell my home so they could have the money. He didn't visit me when I was sick until I was literally dying. That's not love, that's convenience. You could leave him something, she suggested. Not everything, but something. A gesture that says you still cared, even though you were disappointed. I thought about that. I thought about it for a long time. Sitting there in my living room while the afternoon light slanted through the windows, Robert had installed himself 30 years ago. No, I said finally. He gets the $10. He gets to live with what he did and what he didn't do. Maybe it'll teach him something. Maybe it won't. But either way, I've said what I needed to say. Eleanor packed up her briefcase. The will is airtight, Loretta. They can contest it, but they won't win. I've made sure of that. How long? I asked. How long after I die before the reading? Standard is 2 weeks, but I can expedite it if you want. Have it read within a week. Do that, I said. I don't want them waiting, speculating, hoping. I want them to know quickly. She promised she would, and then she left, and I sat there alone in my house and felt something like satisfaction. I spent the next few weeks tying up loose ends. I wrote letters, real letters, handwritten, the kind nobody sends anymore, to the people who'd mattered in my life. I told Betty how much her friendship had meant, how she'd been the daughter of my heart, even though we weren't related by blood. I told Diane and Harold how grateful I was for their kindness, their presence, their willingness to show up. I wrote to the librarian who'd worked with me on the children's program, to the director of the women's shelter, to Marcus and Diane's granddaughter, explaining why I'd left them what I did, and I wrote to David. That letter was the hardest. I drafted it 7 times before I got it right, before I found the words that said what I needed to say without being cruel, but also without pulling any punches. Dear David, it began, by the time you read this, you'll have heard my will read aloud, and you'll know what I left you. I want you to understand why. I loved you from the moment you were born. Your father and I poured everything we had into raising you, into giving you opportunities we never had, into making sure you knew you were loved and valued and important. We worked hard, saved carefully, went without so you wouldn't have to. When you married Jennifer, I tried to love her too because you loved her. I tried to be a good mother-in-law, tried to be gracious and kind and generous, and in return, she treated me like an ATM, like a burden, like something to be managed and eventually liquidated for profit. But David, the part that broke my heart wasn't Jennifer. It was you. You stood by and watched. You heard what she said to me at my birthday party, not even worth $10, and you asked me to apologize to her. You let her plan to sell my home, the home your father and I built together, the home we raised you in. You didn't call when I was in the hospital the first time. You only showed up when you thought I was dying. I'm leaving you $10 because that's what your wife said I was worth. I hope every time you look at that bill, you think about the choices you made, the mother you had, and the son you became. I hope you learn from this. I hope you become a better man. And I hope someday you understand that love isn't about inheritance or money or property. It's about showing up, standing up, and speaking up for the people who matter. You didn't do any of those things for me, so I'm not doing them for you now. I loved you, David. I always will. But love doesn't mean letting yourself be trampled, and it doesn't mean rewarding bad behavior. Take care of yourself. Learn from this. Be better. Mom. I sealed that letter and gave it to Eleanor with instructions that it be given to David after the will reading, not before. I wanted him to hear the will first, to feel the shock of it, and then to read my words and understand. Betty knew what I'd done. I'd told her everything, shown her the will, explained my reasoning. She'd cried, not because she was getting the house. though she was overwhelmed by that, but because she understood what it cost me to do this, to essentially disinherit my only child. "You're sure?" she kept asking. "Loretta, you're absolutely sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," I told her, and I meant it. The weeks passed. My health declined slowly, then faster. The hospice nurse came twice a week, then every other day, then daily. The pain increased, and the morphine doses increased with it. I spent most of my time in bed or in Robert's chair, too weak to do much else, watching the world outside my window and thinking about my life. I thought about the good times, falling in love with Robert, bringing David home from the hospital, the first time we paid off the mortgage, quiet Sunday mornings with coffee and the newspaper, the way Robert's hand felt in mine. I thought about my friends, my quilts, my books, the children at the library who'd hug me when I volunteered. I thought about the bad times, too. Jennifer's cruelty, David's betrayal, the loneliness after Robert died, the feeling of being diminished and dismissed and devalued. And I thought about what I'd done, the will I'd written, the plan I'd made. Some people might call it revenge. Some might say I was being vindictive, that I should forgive and forget, that family is family and you should love them unconditionally. But you know what? Sometimes love means setting boundaries. Sometimes it means saying this far and no further. Sometimes it means protecting yourself and your legacy and the people who actually showed up for you. I didn't regret what I'd done, not for a second. David came to visit twice more. Both times he sat by my bed and held my hand and talked about nothing much. The weather, something funny that happened at work, did I need anything? He didn't mention Jennifer. He didn't mention the will. He didn't mention money. Maybe he was finally learning to just be present. Or maybe he'd finally accepted that he wasn't getting anything and was making the best of it. Either way, I appreciated those visits for what they were, a son sitting with his dying mother. Nothing more, nothing less. One morning in early April, I woke up and knew it was close. I could feel it in my bones, in my chest, in the way breathing had become a conscious effort instead of something automatic. I called Betty. "It's time," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She was there in 10 minutes. Harold and Sue came too, and Diane. They sat around my bed, holding my hands, telling me stories, making sure I wasn't alone. The hospice nurse came, checked my vitals, increased my morphine. "Is David coming?" the nurse asked gently. I nodded. Betty had called him. He arrived an hour later, rushed and disheveled and scared. He took my other hand, the one Betty wasn't holding, and he cried. "I'm sorry, Mom," he kept saying. "I'm so sorry for everything." I squeezed his hand as hard as I could, which wasn't very hard at all, and whispered, "I know." And I did know. I knew he was sorry. I knew he regretted his choices. I knew he loved me in whatever way he was capable of loving. But knowing that didn't change what I'd done. It didn't change the will or the $10 or the lessons I hoped he'd learn from it all. I drifted in and out for hours. At some point, I heard Betty say that Jennifer had called, asking if she should come, and David telling her no, absolutely not. I was glad. I didn't want her here. She had no place in this room at this moment. The last thing I remember clearly was looking around at the faces surrounding my bed. Betty, Harold, Sue, Diane, David. My people. The ones who'd shown up. The ones who'd loved me. And then I let go. I know what you're thinking. How can I be telling you this story if I died? And you're right to wonder. But see, I didn't actually die that day in April. I came damn close. The hospice nurse said later that she'd never seen someone come back from where I'd been, that it was miraculous, that I must have had unfinished business keeping me here. And maybe I did. I woke up 2 days later in the hospital, again, hooked up to machines and IVs and oxygen, Betty asleep in the chair beside my bed. When she saw I was awake, she started crying and called for the nurse and held my hand so tight I thought she might break my fingers. "You scared the hell out of me," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I scared the hell out of me," I told her. The doctors couldn't explain it. My heart should have given out. By all accounts, it had given out. But somehow, some way, it had started again, and here I was, still breathing, still alive, still in this world. They kept me in the hospital for a week. David visited every day, and I could see the confusion on his face, relief that I was alive, but also something else, something that looked like disappointment. Though I'm sure he'd never admit it, maybe not even to himself, because if I was alive, the will didn't matter yet. The inheritance didn't matter yet. He'd have to keep waiting, keep wondering, keep pretending to be the dutiful son while secretly calculating when he'd finally get what he thought he was owed. But here's the thing. Almost dying changed something in me. It clarified something that had been murky before. I didn't want to wait until I was dead to set things right. I didn't want the satisfaction of revenge from beyond the grave. I wanted to be there. I wanted to see their faces. I wanted to watch Jennifer collapse when she realized what I thought she was worth. So when I got home from the hospital, when I was strong enough to sit up and think clearly, I called Eleanor Pritchard. "I want to do something different with my will," I said. "Loretta, we've been through this." "Not change it," I interrupted. "I want to read it to them while I'm still alive." There was a long pause. Then Eleanor said, "Explain." "I want you to set up a formal meeting, like we planned for after my death. Get everyone there. Betty, Harold, Diane, all the beneficiaries, and David and Jennifer. Tell them it's to discuss my estate planning, to go over my wishes while I'm still alive so there are no surprises later. But what we're really going to do is read them my will, right then with me sitting there. That's highly unusual. I don't care if it's unusual. Can we do it legally?" Eleanor thought about it. Technically, yes. It's your will, your property, your right to disclose your plans however you want. But Loretta, are you sure? Once they know, you can't unring that bell, and you'll have to live with the aftermath. I almost died, Eleanor. I was ready to die, but I'm still here, and I'll be damned if I'm going to spend whatever time I have left wondering what their faces will look like when they find out. I want to see it. I want to be there. "Okay," she said slowly. "Okay. Let me make some calls." It took 2 weeks to arrange. Eleanor called it an estate planning meeting, made it sound official and important. She told David it was crucial that he attend, that his mother wanted to go over her final wishes and needed him there. She told him he could bring Jennifer if he wanted to, though they were separated, because these things affected both of them. David agreed immediately. Of course he did. This was the meeting he'd been waiting for, the one where he'd finally find out what he was getting. Eleanor called the other beneficiaries separately: Betty, Harold, Diane, the library director, the shelter director, Marcus, Diane's granddaughter. She told them the truth, that I wanted to read my will to everyone while I was still alive, that it was going to be intense, but that I needed them there for support. They all agreed, every single one of them. The meeting was set for May 15th at Eleanor's office, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Everyone would be there. I spent the 2 weeks before the meeting getting my strength back, eating as much as I could stomach, resting when I needed to, but also pushing myself to be strong enough for what was coming. Betty helped me pick out an outfit, a nice navy blue dress that made me look dignified, professional. We had my hair done the day before. I even put on a little makeup the morning of, just enough to look alive and alert and completely in control. Betty drove me to Eleanor's office. We arrived early. I wanted to be there first, sitting at the head of the table when everyone else came in. I wanted to own the room before it even started. Eleanor's conference room was bigger than I'd expected, with a long mahogany table and leather chairs and big windows overlooking Main Street. She'd set up place cards, me at the head of the table, Eleanor to my right with a microphone and speaker system set up. I'd asked for that, wanted to make sure everyone could hear every single word. Betty to my left, and everyone else arranged around the table. David and Jennifer's place cards were directly across from me, where I'd have a clear view of their faces. People started arriving at 2:45. Harold and Sue first, then Diane, then the library director, who looked confused but intrigued. Marcus and Diane's granddaughter came together, both of them nervous. The shelter director arrived right at 3, apologizing for being late, even though she wasn't. David and Jennifer arrived at 3:05. David looked nervous, like he knew something was off but couldn't figure out what. Jennifer looked annoyed at having to be there, but also curious. She was dressed like she was going to a business meeting, pencil skirt, silk blouse, heels that clicked on the hardwood floor. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless. She looked at me like I was a bug under a microscope. "Loretta," she said with a nod. Not Mom, not even a greeting, just my name, acknowledgement that I existed. "Jennifer," I replied. They sat down in their assigned seats, David glancing around at all the other people, clearly wondering why there were so many folks he didn't know at his mother's estate planning meeting. When everyone was seated, Eleanor stood up and cleared her throat. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice clear and professional. "We're here today at Mrs. Brennan's request to review her last will and testament. This is an unusual proceeding. Normally, wills are read after death, but Mrs. Brennan has specifically requested that her wishes be made clear while she's still alive and able to answer questions." David leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. Jennifer's eyes gleamed. This was it, the moment they'd been waiting for. Eleanor picked up a document. My will, all 15 pages of it, notarized and witnessed and legal as hell. She adjusted her microphone and began to read. "I, Loretta Jean Brennan, being of sound mind and body." She read through the opening legal language, the declarations of mental competency, the naming of Eleanor as executor. David nodded along, like this was all going as expected. Then Eleanor got to the actual bequests. "To Betty Morrison, who has been the daughter of my heart and my closest friend, I leave my house at 412 Sycamore Street, Cedar Falls, Iowa, along with all furnishings therein, to be transferred to her name immediately upon my death with no conditions or restrictions." Betty gasped. She'd known this was coming, but hearing it read aloud in official legal language made it real. Tears started running down her face. David's face went white. "What?" Eleanor continued without pausing. "To Harold and Sue Patterson, my neighbors and dear friends, I leave my 2012 Honda Accord. To Diane Chen, my quilting circle friend, I leave all of my quilting supplies, finished quilts, and craft materials, along with the sum of $5,000. To the Cedar Falls Public Library Children's Literacy Program, I leave the sum of $31,000 to be used for books, materials, and programming. To the Cedar County Women's Shelter, I leave the sum of $31,000 to be used as the director sees fit for the benefit of the women and children they serve. To Marcus Patterson, I leave the sum of $50,000 from my late husband's life insurance policy to be used for educational expenses. To Sarah Chen, granddaughter of Diane Chen, I leave my jewelry, including my mother's wedding ring and my own engagement ring. David was standing now, his chair pushed back. "Mom, what is this? What are you doing?" I didn't answer. I just looked at him, then at Eleanor, and nodded for her to continue. Eleanor picked up the final page, and I swear the whole room held its breath. To my son, David Robert Brennan, I leave the sum of $10. You could have heard a pin drop. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And then Jennifer made a sound, this strangled, choking noise, and stood up so fast her chair fell backward. $10? She shrieked. $10 fucking dollars? That's what you're leaving him? After everything? After everything what, Jennifer? I asked, and my voice was steady as a rock. After everything you did to try to manipulate me out of my home and my savings? After you ambushed me at my own birthday party? After you told me I wasn't even worth $10? Her face went from red to purple. You can't do this. You can't. This has to be illegal. She's not in her right mind. I assure you, Mrs. Brennan is completely competent, Eleanor said coldly. This will was written over a year ago, witnessed, notarized, and reviewed multiple times. It will hold up in any court. David, Jennifer turned to him, her voice rising to a shriek. Say something, do something. She's stealing your inheritance. But David was just staring at me, his face blank with shock. Eleanor continued reading. The reason for this bequest is as follows. I leave my son $10, approximately what his wife deemed me to be worth at my 70th birthday party. This inheritance serves as a reminder that actions have consequences and that standing by while someone you love is mistreated makes you equally culpable. I hope David learns from this that love is not passive, that family means standing up for each other, and that you cannot expect to inherit from someone whose dignity you did nothing to defend. That's when Jennifer collapsed. It wasn't dramatic at first. Her legs just seemed to give out, and she grabbed for the table but missed. She went down hard, her head bouncing off the table edge on the way down. David lunged for her but wasn't fast enough. She hit the floor with a sound that made everyone wince. Her designer purse flying open and scattering lipstick and her phone and a checkbook across the hardwood. For a second, nobody moved. Then everyone moved at once, Harold jumping up to help, Eleanor calling 911, Sue grabbing napkins to press against the cut on Jennifer's forehead where she'd hit the table. Jennifer came to after a few seconds, groggy and confused. What happened? You fainted, David said, his voice hollow. The will, she said, and then she remembered. Her face crumpled. The will. Oh, God, the will. The paramedics arrived 10 minutes later. They checked her out, said she probably had a mild concussion, should go to the hospital just to be safe. Jennifer refused at first, but David insisted, and finally she agreed. As they were wheeling her out on a stretcher, and how's that for irony, her being wheeled out of the same building where my will was read, she looked at me with pure hatred. You're a vindictive old bitch, she spat. And you, I said calmly, are worth exactly $10. Actually less, but 10 was the amount you specified, so 10 is what you get. David lingered after the paramedics left. The other beneficiaries had quietly excused themselves, Betty hugging me tight, whispering, "I'm so proud of you," Harold squeezing my shoulder, everyone else thanking me with tears in their eyes. Finally, it was just me, David, and Eleanor in that conference room. "Mom," David said, and his voice broke, "how could you?" "How could I?" I repeated. "David, how could you? How could you stand by for 3 years while your wife tried to bully me out of my home? How could you not visit me in the hospital? How could you ask me to apologize to her after she said those things at my birthday? I didn't know she said that. You were standing right there." My voice rose, stronger than it had been in months. "You heard her. Everyone heard her. And you said nothing. You did nothing. You chose her over me every single time. And you know what? She's not even with you anymore. You protected her, defended her, enabled her, and for what? She left you anyway." He sat down heavily, his head in his hands. I know I messed up. I know I should have done more. But Mom, I'm your son. I'm your only child. How can you give everything away to strangers?" "They're not strangers," I said. "They're the people who showed up. They're the people who loved me without expecting anything in return. Betty held my hand in the hospital. Harold checked on me every day. Diane brought me soup when I was sick. Those people earned what I'm giving them. You didn't." "What about forgiveness?" he asked, and he sounded so much like the little boy he used to be that my heart cracked just a little. "What about second chances?" "I'm giving you a second chance," I said. "I'm still alive. You have time to show me that you've learned, that you've changed, that you can be the son I raised you to be instead of the man Jennifer turned you into. But David, forgiveness doesn't mean giving you everything you want. It doesn't mean pretending the last 3 years didn't happen. It means I don't hate you, I don't wish you harm, and I hope you become better. But it doesn't mean you get my house or my money." He looked at me for a long time, and I watched him struggle with it, the anger, the grief, the shame, the realization that he'd burned a bridge he couldn't rebuild. Finally, he stood up. "I guess there's nothing left to say then." "I guess not." He walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. Without turning around, he said, "For what it's worth, I am sorry, and you're right, about all of it." Then he left, and I sat there with Eleanor in the silence. "Well," Eleanor said after a moment, "that was everything you hoped for and more." "Yes," I said, "it was." And I meant it. The aftermath of that meeting rippled through Cedar Falls like a stone through water. Within a week, everyone knew what I'd done. Small towns being what they are, secrets don't keep long. And this was too good a story not to tell. The reactions were mixed. Some people thought I was right, that I'd stood up for myself and taught David and Jennifer a lesson they desperately needed. Others thought I was cruel, that you don't disinherit your only child no matter what, that families should forgive and forget. I didn't care what anyone thought. I'd lived 73 years worrying about what people thought, shrinking myself to fit into other people's expectations. I was done with that. Betty moved in with me a week after the will reading. My health wasn't good enough for me to live alone anymore, and she'd retired from her job at the courthouse, and the house was big enough for both of us. It felt right having her there. The house felt alive again in a way it hadn't since Robert died. We had coffee together every morning, watched our shows in the evening, worked on quilts together when I felt strong enough. She cooked meals I could actually eat, made sure I took my medications, drove me to doctor's appointments. She was family in the truest sense of the word, not blood, but chosen, earned, real. David didn't call for 2 months. I'd be lying if I said that didn't hurt. He was still my son, and some part of me kept hoping he'd call to apologize, to talk things through, to try to rebuild what we'd lost. But the phone didn't ring, and the days turned to weeks, turned to months, and I started to accept that maybe this was it. Maybe the relationship was over, broken beyond repair. Then, in mid-July, he showed up at my door. Betty answered, and I heard her say, "David, what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to my mother," he said. "Please." She looked back at me. I was in Robert's chair, wrapped in one of my quilts, even though it was summer, because I was always cold now. I nodded. David came in and sat on the couch across from me. He looked thinner, older. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I'm getting divorced," he said without preamble. "Jennifer and I are done. It's final next month." "I'm sorry," I said, and I was. Not sorry they were divorcing. I thought that was the best thing for him. but sorry for the pain of it, the failure, the loss of what he thought his life would be. I'm not, he said. I should have done it years ago. She's... He paused, searching for words. She's not a good person, Mom. I don't know if she ever was, or if I just didn't see it, but she's not. And I let her treat you the way she did because it was easier than standing up to her, because I was a coward. I didn't disagree. I've been going to therapy, he continued, trying to figure out how I became the kind of person who lets his wife abuse his mother, trying to understand why I chose her over you over and over again. And what did you figure out? I asked. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. That I'm selfish, that I've always been selfish, that you and Dad gave me everything, and I took it all for granted. And when Jennifer came along promising me more, a bigger house, a better lifestyle, the things I thought I deserved, I jumped at it, even if it meant sacrificing you. It hurt to hear, but it was also a relief. He was seeing it clearly, finally, without excuses or justifications. I don't deserve your forgiveness, he said. I know that. And I'm not asking for the money back or for you to change your will or anything like that. I needed you to know that I see it now, what I did, what I didn't do. And I'm sorry. I'm so, so sorry. I looked at my son, my baby boy who'd grown into a man I didn't always recognize, and I felt something in my chest loosen just a little. Thank you for saying that, I said. It means something. Not everything, but something. He nodded, accepting that. Can I come visit sometimes? Not all the time, not if you don't want me to, but just sometimes? I thought about it. Betty was watching me from the kitchen doorway, ready to throw him out if I said the word. But as angry as I'd been, as hurt as I still was, he was still my son, and he was trying. Sundays, I said. You can come for Sunday dinner. We eat at 5. Don't bring Jennifer. She's gone, he said. Moved back to Chicago for good. She won't be back. Good, I said, and I meant it. That Sunday, David came for dinner. Betty made pot roast, his favorite from when he was a kid, and we sat around my kitchen table, the 3 of us, and talked about nothing much. The weather, his job, a funny story about something that happened at the grocery store. It was awkward, stilted, not like it used to be, but it was a start. He came back the next Sunday, and the next, and slowly, over the course of that summer and into fall, we started to rebuild something. Not the relationship we'd had before. That was gone, broken, irretrievable. But something new, more honest, built on reality instead of obligation. He helped around the house when he visited, fixing things that needed fixing, cleaning gutters, changing light bulbs I couldn't reach. He brought groceries. He sat with me when I had bad days, when the pain was too much and the morphine made me confused and scared. He never asked about the will again, never tried to change my mind or convince me to give him more. He just showed up, did what needed doing, and left. One Sunday in October after dinner, he said, I started volunteering at the library. I looked up, surprised. You did? At the Children's Literacy Program, the one you're leaving the money to. I figured maybe I could help, make up for some of what I took from you by giving to something you cared about. My eyes filled with tears. That's good, David. That's really good. I'm trying to be better, he said. I know it doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't change what I did, but I'm trying. I know you are, I said, and it matters. The months passed. My health continued to decline, but slower than the doctors expected. I had good days and bad days, and the bad days started to outnumber the good, but I was still here, still alive, still getting to see my son every Sunday, watch him try to become the man I'd always hoped he'd be. In December, on Christmas Eve, David showed up with a box. I found this in storage, he said, setting it on the table. When I was packing up the house to move, Jennifer got it in the divorce, I found this box of stuff from when I was a kid. Inside were photos, report cards, drawings I'd saved, awards from school, the baseball mitt Robert had bought him for his 10th birthday. We went through it together, piece by piece, and I told him stories about each item, memories he'd been too young to remember or had forgotten. "I was so loved," he said at one point, his voice thick. "You and Dad, you gave me everything, and I acted like it wasn't enough." "It was enough," I said. "You were just looking in the wrong places for more." We sat there for a long time, surrounded by the debris of his childhood, and I felt something shift. Not forgiveness exactly. I wasn't sure I'd ever fully forgive what he'd done, what he'd allowed to be done. But acceptance, understanding, the beginning of peace. "I'm glad you're still here," he said finally. "I'm glad I got time to try to make this right." "Me too," I said, and I was. I'm 74 years old now. It's been 1.5 years since that meeting in Eleanor's office, since Jennifer collapsed and the truth came out. I'm still alive, though I know I won't be for much longer. My heart is giving out, slowly but surely, and the doctors say it's months now, not years. But you know what? They said that last year too, and here I am. I spend my days in my house, the one I fought to keep, surrounded by people who love me. Betty is here, and Harold comes by most days, and Diane visits twice a week. David comes every Sunday, faithful as clockwork, and we've built something real between us. Not what we had before, but something honest and earned, and maybe even better because it's based on truth instead of obligation. The library dedicated a reading room to Robert and me last month. They used some of the money I'm leaving them to renovate it, put our names on a plaque, filled it with books for kids to read. David took me to the dedication ceremony in a wheelchair, and I sat there looking at that plaque with my husband's name and my name on it, and I cried. This is legacy, I thought, not money or property, but this. A room full of books where children will learn to read, will discover stories, will find worlds beyond Cedar Falls. This is what matters. The women's shelter sent me a letter thanking me for the donation, telling me about the programs they'd be able to expand because of it. The library sends me updates about the kids in the reading program. Marcus sends me postcards from college. He's studying engineering, top of his class, says he couldn't have done it without the money I'm leaving him. These are the returns on my investment. Not financial returns, but human ones. Lives changed, futures secured, kindness repaid. Jennifer, as far as I know, is still in Chicago. David doesn't talk about her much, but he mentioned once that she's engaged to someone else, someone with money. Good for her, I guess. I hope she treats him better than she treated us. Sometimes I think about that moment in Eleanor's office, watching her collapse, seeing the realization dawn on David's face. Some people have said I was cruel, that I should have been the bigger person, that revenge is petty and small. But here's what I learned through all of this. Standing up for yourself isn't petty. Protecting what you've earned isn't small. Expecting to be treated with dignity and respect isn't asking too much. I spent most of my life being polite, being accommodating, putting other people's comfort ahead of my own worth. I let Jennifer diminish me because I didn't want to cause problems. I let David's passivity hurt me because I didn't want to lose my son. But you know what? I almost lost myself instead. I almost let them take everything, my home, my savings, my self-respect. And for what? So they could have a nicer house they couldn't afford? So Jennifer could buy more designer handbags? No, I decided no, and that decision saved me. When I'm gone, and I will be gone soon, I can feel it. I'll leave behind a house for Betty, who earned it with her friendship and love. I'll leave money for causes I believe in, for people who need it, for a future I won't see but can still shape. I'll leave my son $10 and a lesson. And I'll leave this story, this testament to the idea that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, that you can be 70 years old and sick and dying and still have power. That you get to decide what your life means and who deserves to benefit from it. I think about women my age, women who are being manipulated or controlled or diminished by their families. Women who are told they're being difficult when they assert boundaries, that they're being selfish when they prioritize their own well-being. Women who are expected to give and give and give until there's nothing left, and then apologize for having nothing left to give. And I want to tell them, you don't have to accept that. You don't have to let them take from you. You don't have to diminish yourself to make them comfortable. Stand up, speak up, protect yourself. Change your locks if you need to. Rewrite your will. Set boundaries and defend them. Surround yourself with people who love you for who you are, not what they can get from you. It's not too late. It's never too late. I'm lying in my bed now, in my house, looking out the window at the garden I planted 40 years ago. Betty is in the kitchen making soup. David will be here in an hour for Sunday dinner. Harold's outside fixing my porch rail, even though I've told him he doesn't need to. I'm dying, but I'm not dead yet. And until I am, I'm going to live on my own terms, surrounded by people who deserve to be here, in a house I fought to keep, with a will that says exactly what I want it to say. Jennifer thought I wasn't worth $10. She was wrong. I'm worth this house, this life, this choice. I'm worth standing up for. I'm worth protecting. And so are you. Whatever situation you're in, whatever family dynamics are weighing you down, whatever manipulation or guilt or obligation you're carrying, you're worth more than that. You deserve dignity. You deserve respect. You deserve to live in your own home and spend your own money and make your own choices without someone making you feel small for it. It took me 70 years to fully understand that, but I got there. And if I can do it, a working-class widow from Cedar Falls, Iowa, with a high school education and arthritis and a failing heart, then so can you. Stand up. Don't let them diminish you. Don't let them take what you've earned. Don't let them make you feel like protecting yourself is somehow wrong. You're worth more than $10. You're worth more than their greed or their convenience or their expectations. You're worth fighting for. And it's never, ever too late to start.